So, yeah, we're rolling now, and we don't do this, but we are doing this, right? And we did our first episode last time, our first series of episodes, and we went 3 hours, hard in the paint. And we talked about a lot. And I guess in my head, kind of coming to this second table of something that we don't do a lot, but we're doing right now, is what was that experience like for you guys, and how do we feel about the nature of the discussion that we had and what we covered in relation to your son's story? You can go first.
It was good, honestly. Like, I was sharing with Jack on the backside, and I shared this with y'all like afterwards, but I was super anxious going in. Legitimately, like multiple weeks of like, I feel like God's asking me to do this, and yet talking about the deepest part of my soul that have literally, the darkest nights, and so it's hard to go back there. I like comfort, and so going to those places is not easy, and yet it's good. We've said from the beginning, Abram is worth missing, and so our hope is that we keep sharing stories, that we do keep missing him, and like that. You've said the quote before, but it's like the extension of love, like after someone dies, is grief. It's because you continue to love them. And so I think that was kind of our takeaway. I was honestly just really actually encouraged by how it went. I think specifically too, like it really helped like y'all two being here. Y'all are great friends. And so, we do this normally, not with the cameras and mics and all the things that do make me a little uncomfortable, but we do this normally. And so we talk about the deep things and the hard things, and that's very natural. So I was very encouraged by how it went.
Yeah, I was very pleased. Better than I could, at least in my head. I haven't listened to anything we've said. We talked about.
We might have a different.
You don't want to do that.
But no, it really just getting to dig in on some. The spaces that we're digging on are not natural conversation points, and
they're things we only share with people that we know intimately. Like, so that there is a part of that where you're putting yourself out there, and whether there's 5 people that are going through this, listen to this, or there's however many, like if it helps those people, that's worth it. But it's still a vulnerable place which we're naturally vulnerable, but it's still hard.
But even if we're more vulnerable than some or whatever, like it's just, we're not going to get to those discussion points very naturally.
No,
just we're not going to go there. So I appreciate being able to dig on that and illuminate some things that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And it hopefully, the benefit of whoever, and because they're these awful suffering places that as a culture we suffer poorly, and I did not know where to turn or how to deal with it. So
we still don't always know how to deal with it.
And not that we have that figured out, but just like even just a refuge of feeling sane because I'm having these experiences and these feelings that I've never experienced before, and getting to poke around and say this is actually pretty normal for this situation, but I didn't have a frame of reference for that when this happened to us.
Yeah, neither of us did. So.
Oh.
What's interesting to me and all that, just listening to you guys talk, is like there's something about telling stories that I don't want to butcher it. There's certain things that are only reserved for a story, and you don't say them outside of that context, right? And so we've been talking about life. He and I go to breakfast every single week with this guy, and we talk about a lot of stuff. And we've talked around a lot of these subjects, but never about these subjects, because these subjects belong embedded in a story, and outside of that story, they're not, you don't really talk about them, kind of thing. Right. And so what's interesting right now is that we're devoting the time to tell a story, and it's your guys' story and Abram's story and your family's story and this collective community story around an experience. And what was interesting to me is there's a lot that I didn't know. You know, there's a lot that I thought about. There's a lot that I wondered about, but there was never it's not what you talk about while you're eating steak and eggs kind of thing. It just isn't, because it's not story time.
Yeah.
It's other time, you know? And so when we're going through it last time, it was like there was elements of the whole story that were coming out that I wonder, my question that I had in my head was like, I wonder if they'd forgotten about these things, because you're going through a thing and it's you going through a thing. And then once you get on the tail end of whatever that is, you start to tell a story about that thing. And the story is you could grab 20 things from it. You know, it's too much to even comprehend all that you guys have gone through. And so you grab what you can and you tell what you can, kind of thing. And if you told it all, it would be an encyclopedia.
And I think there's grace of the Lord in, I mean, there's so much we still probably haven't fully processed. Like, I think we tried to do that. And even doing this, I think, is healing in that to some degree, of having to process things that we hadn't thought about in a while. But I think the grace of God throughout our story, even like he doesn't make you process it all in that moment. Like, even, I mean, obviously our story didn't end on this side of heaven with Abram being healed, but like, even I walked with other people that their kid is, and the anxiety and fear and the whole aftermath of that is a very different story, where like all of a sudden you're processing all this trauma because you can't process it all during it. And so I think there's grace in that. We're not meant to have to ever go through that. And so,
yeah, I mean, it's he from diagnosis to the end, you know, it's 22 months for him, but then we're still in it. And I've got no hope to distill all that into 10 or 12 hours of a podcast, right? But
this point it might be 20 hours of podcast.
For sure, that suffering informs so much of how I see and react to things now. And we get to dig on those things, but actually pulling back the root a little bit of here's where that came from, and walking through this and seeing this system failed here, and this was good and now it's not good kind of story, and which is all so disorienting when you're going through it. But I would suspect it's pretty natural, or maybe not natural, but common for folks that have to swim in those waters. But I just, like I said, for me, I just was just trying to do, and it's what anybody's going to do. They're going to try and do the best they can with what they know, but it was so different. I had no frame of reference for any of it.
So I think that kind of leads us into today and processing last week. And you kind of felt after that, like you wanted to kind of navigate the waters a little bit differently today, kind of thing. And let's talk a little bit about what you were sensing and all that.
Yeah. So we hit pretty hard on philosophically working outside the lines provided within the lane that Western medicine gave us. We did not get to that point till about 19, 20 months in, out of the 22. Maybe a little sooner, but not much.
It was in March, and yeah.
And basically what happens at that point is like we're desperate and we're getting no options presented to us. They're just like, there's nothing else we can do.
But we're not done fighting.
And we're not done fighting. So then we pivot into what can we do? And so we had a doctor in holistic functional medicine that we knew and trusted before. Yeah. And he and his wife were instrumental in just these holistic approaches, through supplements and even essential oils. Just, a lot of it was targeting like inflammation markers, like the whole idea of giving Abram's body more to fight with, to boost his body up, because that doesn't really exist in the Western medicine protocol. It's destroy and then hopefully it rebuilds. But we're trying to come alongside and give him his body some stuff to really fight with.
How long into the fight, right? So you going back to in the context of the story, it's like normal week, son's not feeling good. we're in the hospital, we're getting a diagnosis, we're doing treatment, we're notifying family, we're calling friends, we're beginning the fight. How long into, just placement wise, how long into the fight were you guys going through all that you started to question?
It's over a year.
Yeah, so he was diagnosed in January, and it was really probably...
It was March.
I was going to say, April, May of the following year. So 14 months later, 16 months later before we... And for us, in our story, some people may be more comfortable in that space of pushing back on, hey, that's great. But for us, we weren't there. We like, okay, this is what the doctor said. So that's what we're going to do.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that was
So for 14 months, you guys operated within the system. Nothing against it, but you operated.
Yeah.
This is what they're telling us to do. These are the options that are provided for us. We're going to do exactly this. This is what's best for our son as far as we know at 14 months. And then at some point, we started to think maybe we need to be...
Yeah, so
a different thought came in.
Yeah, at that point, things are not going well for Abram. And that's the feedback we're getting from the medical team. And so just starting to see some of the cracks in the foundation of what we can do, because it feels very comfortable and to have a plan and be like, this is what we're going to do and here's how we're going to attack. And that's like, okay. So it gives you some semblance of control in an out of control situation. And then when that starts to fail, which is what we were seeing because his situation was getting worse. And we weren't uncommon in that for other parents or caregivers who were like, well, not having an answer is not good enough.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go find one if you don't have one. And that was what we were faced with.
Then you learn a lot of things that we didn't know at the beginning.
Yeah, and it's super hard and intimidating because there's no, this is what you should do, X, Y, Z. So you're stumbling forward with people like that doctor in functional holistic medicine. We trusted him. He's not a cancer doctor, but
not pediatric oncology even. Like that's even a whole different level.
Yeah, and but we trusted him to, give our son something, his body could use to build it. I had a ton of comfort in knowing we weren't going to do anything that would hurt him through those, those supplements and stuff that we do. And it was only going to build him up. But it's just a hard place to get to. And, someone who's just got diagnosed and, going through it, I wouldn't expect them to have the mentality I did 18 months in. However, if I could plant a seed at this point where they can get to that place a little sooner than we did, I would advocate for that.
Yeah, I think it's a very natural thing for especially y'all talk about Western stuff, Western medicine, how we so you're way above anything shock, oh my gosh, this is what we're dealing with. And you're like, well, what do we do? And they're like, this is what we do. And just so natural for 98% of the folks to be like, okay, well, let's do that. And then you got to that point to where you do. That's my question is if you could go back to the beginning, what would you say to somebody to I know you just tried to, but get very specific on hey, this is what I would do that, but then I would also, would you do something else? Would you, because when I remember when y'all started that, there was a lot of hope, relief of oh my gosh, it's doing this for him. It's doing this for us. It's gosh, we wish we would have done this from.
Yep.
And so what would you say? What would you be like? Because naturally most folks are just going to be like, what do you want to do? Let's do that.
I think at the end of the day, just realizing how much we ultimately were his advocate and everything needs to be filtered through that. And so I think to some degree you're like, well, you're the doctor, but you're their parent. And I do think there's something about being a parent. We talked about this last time a little bit, my mama intuition, I knew something was wrong with Abram. That's why we were in and out of the doctor for so much time before he got diagnosed. I knew something was wrong. Yeah. And I kept trying to get people to hear me say that something was wrong. And so there is something too, I think, that you ultimately are their advocate. And so everything has to be filtered. And I think the more you're able to take in information, and we talked a little bit about that before, like that's not everyone's bent, but like the more you're able to learn, and even like stuff outside your box, like I think there's benefit. And I just wish I was more open to that at the beginning. Because even the stuff I know, like I saw before, that like people talking about doing this stuff, and I'm like, I would never do that. And it's a lot of stuff we ended up doing that I'm like, dang, I wish we would have done that from day one.
Yeah. So specifically, like we'd do vitamins, supplements that again targeting like inflammation markers, which we had to get. I didn't understand any of that, so
No.
I'm getting medical help that I
Neither of us had any.
trust. But again, this is like functional medicine, holistic medicine is not going to be in the same stream as an oncology hospital. Like that's going to be, you're going to have to find that somewhere else. And that's, I wish I could just tell the listener, or like, this is what you do, but it's going to be hard for whatever context you're in to sort through that.
Sure.
The other thing that was a big deal for us was cannabis use.
Which that's the thing, like specifically when I said that earlier, we would have done that from day one. Like I remember seeing people post on this neuroblastoma site that they did it and being like, there's no way in hell I'd ever give my kid cannabis. Like, and once we started doing it, we had them on these fake synthetic appetite, like increasers, all this stuff, and nothing worked good for pain. Like all the opioids caused more problems.
Yeah.
So I would say where we got to was just the understanding that anything you put in your body, there is a consequence to it. And so
Good and bad.
And so when you're in a cancer or serious situation like that, like chemo's like the worst poison man's ever come up with. All right. So we're injecting this into 6-year-old, or in our case, but, you're weighing that against, what you're dealing with in life and death situations. So sacrifices are made. But like what Ashley's talking about, for pain management, the hospitals are going to give opioids, which I'm not saying don't do that.
They were a lifesaver for him at certain points.
Yeah.
Right.
However, what we didn't understand is like, Abram's in so much pain, and then he'd get, a dose of opioids and or narcotics or whatever, and the pain would subside, but it would effectively shut down his gut, where he'd get so backed up that
It's a whole different.
a week and a half later, the constipation was way worse than any of the pain that we were dealing with to offset initially.
Yeah.
And so, like, we're in a state where cannabis is not something that can be prescribed. So as a parent, we're consulting the medical team on, is this okay? And, there's just a lot to sort through of, is this a safe substance or whatever? And, there's a lot of risk with cannabis on brain development. And I'm not,
Never advocate for any other reason, like in the sense of young children.
yeah. So I don't want to say that lightly.
Yeah.
However, the benefits for him,
They were huge.
were huge. It didn't back him up. It hits the pain receptors in a different way than the opioids did. That gave him a lot of comfort.
He wanted to eat.
Gave him appetite. Yeah.
Golly,
He wanted to eat.
we couldn't
Yeah.
feed him enough.
And it was shocking because we
Yeah.
had gone through this whole season. I mean, at that point, we're probably 9 months in of our kid. Like he had a feeding tube at that point, probably for 9 months,
Yeah.
where he just didn't want to eat ever. And so we were literally sustaining him through this feeding tube. And all of a sudden we start giving him that. And this kid's like, and that's with appetite, like increasers, like
Right.
synthetic
Happened
one.
quick.
Yeah. There's a documentary on Netflix called
Yes.
Weed the People. And that was really helpful for us as far as state of California is actually doing high doses of like THC to combat the cancer.
Yeah.
And there's stuff to it.
So there was that potential positive element. We didn't experience that, but just from a pain and like we would try and do like just CBD during the day because it was anti-inflammatory. Like we've got video of him, 6 weeks before he passed away, of him swimming in the pool, like full range of motion,
No kidding.
like just wild stuff that we hadn't experienced.
Hadn't experienced that up until that. I mean, obviously up to that point, but within his cancer journey, that was an anomaly.
It drastically
Talk about that a little
changed
bit.
his quality of life. Like that was what was so flooring, more so than, I mean, there was one hardcore opioid we did methadone, and it helped his quality of life a lot. But that stuff, like you want to compare the two, I mean, that's a lot
Yeah.
harder on all things than that. And so seeing that and then seeing the difference, we're like, that has to be better. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're trying, especially if there's a THC component in it, like we're not trying to make our son high all day long because then we kind of lose him,
yes,
right?
we didn't want that at all. We wanted him.
We'd administer right before bedtime, so he's sleeping through most of it, and then during the day we try and do CBD, where he's not getting.
Yeah, the sleep thing was crazy.
He slept great,
and he hadn't slept great, and at that point,
yeah, and so there's a lot of things we found advantageous about cannabis use for him, and but again, we didn't get to that till so far down the line, and I would have done it from day one if I had to do it over again.
Yeah.
The only other thing we did is you found a doctor.
Yes.
That she was more. Well, I guess you can describe her.
Well, so I think one of the hardest things when we started going down that road, and you kind of touched on this, just the natural stuff. It's so hard because, I mean, Western medicine, like with that, they're giving us a plan, right? Like they have this set plan, this set routine. These are the medicines you do. This is what you do. And when you don't know something, like that's really helpful. And so all of a sudden, both of us who have really no background on anything natural, I mean, medical either, but like we had touched and stuff, but we just didn't know what we were doing. And so then you're trying to Google stuff and find stuff. And so you're trying to figure out what to give your son, what to do. And I'm like, that was probably one of the most overwhelming feelings for me. Cause I'm like, there's still like, it's still medicine. It's natural, but it's medicine. And so like, there is things that like interact. There is stuff that you want to do it well.
Yeah.
And so that was so much pressure. Eventually I started looking into it, and we actually found a natural pediatric, like, she works with oncology patients. She used to actually be in the Western medicine world working, I think in the ER. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And then her daughter actually got cancer. And so she ended up taking away from that. And now she has her own practice. And that's literally what she does. And so thankfully, one of the few good things in 2020, 2021, like everything you can do virtually. And so we were able to, I mean, she's not based out of Texas. And so we were able to meet with her, and she actually gave us a plan. Like we did blood work. She read all our scans. I mean, it was like very much like how you would meet with a doctor. And I think for us, that was huge, because taking that pressure off of like, okay, like you actually know what you're doing, because we didn't. And we had a little bit of help from, who we know here, but anyway, that was and that's how we found her. And that was,
the functional medicine doctor here wasn't an oncology doctor. He was helpful for building the body up, but thinking about how are we going to actually target the problem of cancer, this other doctor.
Yeah. And I wish we had found her from day one. Like that's like I think because she's very pro, like what I didn't want is someone to be like, no, don't ever do chemo. Like, I mean, I think we would still have chosen to do those things. And she's very for that. Like you have to do with what we have right now, like that is what you have, but there are things you can do with it. And that's basically what she gave us. And so I wish from day one we were working alongside her, because I mean, by the time we found her, I think we're on hospice.
Yeah, we were.
And so it's hard to come back from that
when you're that far down the road. Yeah. So if we would have, we're not
that it ultimately would have saved him,
right?
But that's not what I'm saying.
We don't hold that, but golly, he would have
felt better.
He would have felt and functioned at such a higher level, because we saw that just that little window of time. He felt so much better, and everything the scans were telling us was like he's in way worse condition than he, like, it was just getting worse. But he was swimming in the pool with his brothers and sister.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about that day for a second. What was that like? amidst all the days that he had, or all the days that were
You're
kind
floored.
of occurring throughout that whole process, what was that day like?
So, it was amazing. A lot of things going through my mind. Part of it was, I thought the Lord was going to heal him, and
Something special's happened today.
yes, I'm like, this is not normal, because I've been on, a day by day, play by play of his deterioration, and to see him start to rebound and do some things that he hadn't been able to do at all for months was.
So what was he doing? I mean, was he in the hospital at that point? Was he at home? What was the normal kind of ebb and flow of his conditions? Was that 14 months in? Where are we?
So he's diagnosed in January of 20, and about in May of 21, we had just kind of gotten through 2 rounds of a different immunotherapy, which is kind of like the Hail Mary. If this doesn't work, what the doctor telling us is like, we don't know what else to do.
Which I will brag on our Western, like our medical doctors there. That was huge. It was he was the first person at that hospital to ever get that treatment, and they were great about literally bringing it there so that we didn't have to travel for it.
Yeah, at the time, most people were having to go to New York to do it.
Yeah,
which in the middle of the pandemic, New York's is the last place I wanted to take him or my family or anything.
Fair.
So they were great at advocating for us to do that. But when pretty quickly the treatment ended and we were going in for scans, and it was one of those terrible scans where we knew it was going to be bad news before we saw the scan, just because we're watching him.
Based on his pain.
And then we ended up at the very end of May in the hospital, and the doctor's talking to us about signing, DNRs, do not resuscitate paperwork. Like,
The first one was in March. We had one then too. It was the second time. We had to do it a couple times.
yeah, but I'm talking about when he was actually like, we're thinking this is the end.
Yeah.
And so that was in
Yeah.
end of May going into June, and we're talking to the palliative care team. We're like on hospice.
So this is the
That's when we
context
started hospice.
backdrop of his swimming.
So the swimming,
Everything you're describing?
yeah, the swimming was like at the end of July, 1st of August, months later from this. And that's where,
So you're talking to palliative care. You guys
Yes.
are
Oh, yeah.
beginning the process of
yes,
making the
all of a
end
sudden-
decisions kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
He's walking around and
yeah. So like we go from this place of like where the palliative care team's talking to me like he's about to go in the next 3 hours
that's
till we get 4 more months of him, and really not terrible 4 more months.
really till that last month.
And I know we're
when,
not trying to make a case for anything. I'm just trying to understand, like, that's when we started using cannabis. Is that at that point kind of thing, like desperation point? We started getting a little
Yes.
more
So in
open
that-
with what we were trying to do, kind of thing.
That April-May timeframe
Yeah.
is when I start really. And the other hard part about Abram's journey was because of the pandemic. Ashley and Grandma were primary care, and I wasn't able to be up there with him.
until palliative care, that was the difference. That was the change too. You were able to.
Well, toward
Fight.
the end of it, I was more in the trenches, and I'm getting a first review of what's going on here, and so it's like, as his daddy, I'm like, no, this is not right. This is not what we're doing. But I had to. What hurts me in that is I wasn't in that the whole time, and that was something the pandemic cost us because
I mean,
of
we
the
were
rules.
communicating through it, and a lot of times you'd be on
But
speaker.
I had to go through it, and it wasn't till that part that I was going through it, and that at that point, I'm just getting, because when you're admitted, the doctors and the nurses and technicians, they're running 12-hour shifts. So every 12 hours you have a new point person and what I was just seeing, and I just had to go through this, was just, all right, this is what's happening to Abram. Let's try this and give him some medicine. And they're just trying stuff, like, and it just took me to have to see that and be like, well, okay, these are educated guesses, but they don't really know. And so then I'm like, well, I know myself. So by the end of it, like, I'm telling the doctor, like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Like that. I know my son. This is an educated guess from you, but I've been through this with him to know that this particular thing is not going to be helpful.
Right.
And I felt very comfortable doing that. I would have not been comfortable doing that 6 months
I
previously.
had no idea. Yeah.
And so getting to that point, again, we're talking like we're about to lose him any day. And this is end of May, end of June. Whereas, in June, and again, just given our medical team at Children's a lot of credit, Ashley proposed this kind of this approach with a chemo plus an immunotherapy that had been successful previously.
And someone that I had connected with. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just through the whole Facebook world. I mean, finding people that had gone through certain things and stuff that had worked.
And it was not a normative thing or protocol. But,
There were studies going on about it.
but what studies in that world means it's not allowed. Like, so what you need is
Unless you're in the controlled environment,
Right.
that is exactly what.
right. And so we need to give them a lot of credit because they let us try some things there. But at the same time, that's where I got in gear of like, hey, I'm going to go figure out how else we can go after this thing. And so we checked out of the hospital late June. And he had July and part of August that were really, I mean, we went to the beach, our family beach trip, and he spent a week there.
And not to make it all sound like it was easy, though. I mean, he was better than he.
What was his? So in my head, I'm trying to understand. Like, was he at the hospital? Was he in a bed at that
Yeah.
point?
Yeah.
At a hospital in the bed.
Yep.
For how long? Months.
For
We were back and forth, but home in a bed. We had a bed at
But he
home.
back and forth. He
but
wasn't
when we
active
went,
at that point.
yeah, when we went at the end of May on that scary time, we were there straight for 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And
I think it was 3.
So he was just in a bed, and we were there with him. And at that point, also, we were allowed to both be there
And the kids could come up intermittently
because
they were a lot.
they're thinking this is the end, so they're making room for that.
And family, like we could, just family was like pretty much it, but they would let family up at certain times.
Okay.
But at that point, you're talking about being an advocate too. Y'all got more adamant about this person is coming in,
Yeah, we did.
and their family leave us
Yeah.
the hell alone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I will say our oncologist was great about that.
Yeah.
It wasn't her.
Right.
Like she's like, I will fight for you.
yeah,
Like she was
which
awesome.
is cool. Which is cool.
But
Yeah.
the
I
hospital
do
didn't
remember.
always
yeah,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where he is, and then what else changes? I'm not like an advocate for cannabis kind of thing, but that was a thing, right? And I'm in my head where I'm trying to go is like I'm trying to get up to swimming.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
where was he? And then what happened those last like 4 like deathly months? They shouldn't have been like that. Something changed.
Yeah, so I'm feeling the failure of the system and its options. So I'm desperate to find anything else to help him. At that point, so he had cancer in his hips, and his like backbone.
The legs were the worst part.
So in his legs, it made it super painful to walk. And that's where the CBD came in. And it's like that anti-inflammatory just made it, like, cause he was on methadone constantly, but if you just gave him the methadone, he couldn't do that. Like he couldn't hardly walk.
When we first had started it helped. And then, I mean, just stuff kept
The
going.
side effects
and
of it were too much. Yeah.
not even just that. Like, it's just
No.
like he kept progressing, like cancer wise. And so it wasn't enough. And so it was just,
Yeah,
we added that in and it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, the cancer. I mean, it's such a nasty cancer, and it makes everything harder and hurt more and more. And so you're constantly upping, on these narcotics.
Well, and you get more tolerance. I mean, that's every medicine like that.
Yeah, and the body adjusts to it.
Yeah, even cannabis.
And so at that point, he's not walking real well. Like at the beach, I was having to, like Ashley said, it wasn't sunshine and rainbows at the beach. I mean, I was carrying him in my arms, like to the beach. Like he couldn't walk in the sand. He did a little bit, but not much.
I mean, he was on the way. I mean, so it was a lot better, I think, than where we had thought. Maybe a month ago before that.
Well, the palliative care team 3 weeks before that said he's a goner.
Yeah,
and in like hours.
There'll be a session on that.
We can talk about it right now. We fired him.
It was not
So
good. We legitimately did, and we're just like,
we
nope.
don't need to talk to those people ever again.
And I do think it made a difference. I don't think either of them are believers, and I'm not saying everyone's had that experience because I've talked to the Dangs who we love, they had a great experience with palliative care.
No, we
and
didn't.
so I think everyone is different, but what we were given, I'm like, hey, until the Lord calls my son home, he's not a goner. And it wasn't a naive place. And I think they were scared that it was maybe, I don't know, but it was Jack and I are both, neither of us have been that ready to fight someone ever. It was just both of us were like, no. And
Abram was literally asleep 3 feet away from me, and we're talking. I'm being talked to like he's gone, and I was like, "This is completely unacceptable and inappropriate."
And so we talked to our oncologist, who I did love in that. She's like, well, just tell them they can't do it. We literally fired them. You can do that. That is a thing.
Yeah. So again, if you need
everyone's story is different, but you can.
Sure.
And that was a good decision for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was untenable for me to.
Yeah, don't
think about. I mean, we're
quitting.
We're battling cancer, so I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
The end game can be very. But to talk about him as he's gone when he's not,
I thought even we actually had people that were on hospice that came in and helped us, and even they were way better about it. That was not it wasn't like they were talking like that. They're interacting and just talking to him about stuff, but very helpful, not in this way that what we got presented with when we were there was, I think we met with them twice and we were both like,
that's it.
We're done. So
yeah, because in that they're limiting what's possible.
Yeah.
And they're making statements that don't belong to them, right? It's not that you can't be educated and they've seen a lot of different things happen in those environments, but at the end of the day, you're like, we're not looking for you to make that decision or say anything about that. That's not your space, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And we tried to have that conversation with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it was quit giving him feeding tubes that make him more uncomfortable. I'm like, well,
which we did do at some point. There did come, just those the last 3 days of his life, maybe.
And you're talking about in June.
Yes.
This is into May, June.
Yes, they were sweet.
And you're talking about you still had July, August, September.
Some very sweet moments with their family that I'm
Absolutely.
you want to stop giving a feeding tube. And I'm like, what you would have robbed.
Yep.
Regardless of what the Lord was going to do. It's hard. I don't know.
Yep.
That was brutal.
And that is one of the hardest decisions anyone has to make. I'm not trying to make that light. I also would never judge stopping doing, I do think there's a point where you look at your child and you're like, am I making this worse? You want to ease their suffering, but there is a point that you get to where you're like, it's selfish for me to keep doing these things. I mean, there is. But for us, there was a point where we weren't going to give up until the Lord made that clear. And so, and that really wasn't until the week before.
Yeah.
He actually passed.
Yeah. And so to get to that point, we start really throwing a lot of this holistic stuff, the CBD, the full spectrum stuff. And at the end of July, I got a video of him swimming in the pool where, a couple of weeks before that, he could barely walk, or even just in the pool. He loved being in the pool, but he would just sit. He'd just kind of hang out.
He's squirting people with water guns. He had his little float.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so going back to that moment, my mind was blown and I was just like, man, there might be something else going on here, because just because the video has him swimming underwater in our shallow end, which is not huge. It's probably 20, 22 feet wide. And he swam under the water the whole length of it, full frogman kick, and I'm like, I hadn't seen that range of motion from him in like 6 months.
Wow.
Like
It's January, so that was
yeah.
And that was how many weeks before he passed? Roughly
8 weeks, maybe
8 weeks. Okay.
6 to 8 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
the pool was a gift.
And that was just a.
Yeah.
Did we do that several times, or was that just one day that was?
It was
special?
it was on a daily basis. Like I think that's a fair thing
You guys
to
would
say.
get
Like
out
he
there.
had better days than not at that point.
Yeah. But we were having little highlights of days like that
And that was
where we weren't getting any before.
Yeah.
flashes of strength.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want
Vitality.
to. I don't want to say like, oh, everything was great and he's
No.
running around, and that was not it. But to see something that drastic, where we hadn't seen anything like that for a long time at that point.
And the only thing that changed at that point was
natural.
vitamins, supplements, use of cannabis, things that come from God's green earth kind of thing. You guys are just moving into that realm of wellness, let's just say, and incorporating that into his regimen and diet.
We changed no
You saw a
other,
difference.
like even like Western, like we weren't changing our other meds at that point. We were actually
not like
probably
you
trying
cut
to
off
back.
one
We were
thing
actually
and
trying to
turned on
back
another.
off some of them. Like we went down on methadone for like even like when we started seeing like cannabis work, like we were able to go down on methadone, which was huge. And because I'm like that, I hated that from the get go. That was we didn't do methadone until he was on hospice, but it was still like the point where I'm like, you're fighting for quality of life for your son. You're still fighting for him to live, but you also don't want to like sacrifice, like not at the expense of his pain. And so trying to balance that was really hard.
Yeah, as a parent, it's
Impossible.
the most awful place to sit to balance pain and long term,
Yes.
longevity and vitality.
Well, because you want like the hope, obviously you're fighting for all these things and you want them to live like that. Obviously that's the hope. Right. But then when you do that, there's a cost like, it's exactly what you said at the beginning. There's a cost at everything you put out into your body, good and bad. And so like even cannabis, I think there's a cost. Like I do think there's brain development stuff that is not ultimately the best, but I'm like, compared to other stuff, like I do think it was one of the best options that we had for him at that point. And I would not advocate for that. Like,
We're not saying
for childhood use. Like that's not like the point,
you're
right?
saying well, the way I translate is like you guys watched your son who was very, very sick find reprieve, like his like bodily find reprieve in the use of very holistic elements kind of thing.
Yeah.
Alongside
That were surprising to you. Like you saw him respond to it and it was like his body wish he had it for the previous 10 months before that. That'd be the short version.
the ultimate like in the fight. Like if we did it different, like I wish we would have done things different, maybe somewhat along the lines of Western, but we would have done most of the things that we did. Like
Right.
it wasn't not doing those things. And it's not like, I just don't want it to sound like that, but
No, I don't think it does.
doing these things alongside, I think are huge.
Yeah, the like listening to you guys talk and just kind of going where we've gone for however long it's been. It's like what I hear in all of it is like you guys are his doctors,
You're the advocate.
and you became that. You're the advocate. You're the doctor, and what dominated probably 80% of his kind of wellness program was the powers that be kind of thing. Nothing against that. That's not what we're doing right now. But what you're saying is like, I want it all on the table and I want to incorporate all of it at the same time.
But no one does that. And except, I mean, we found, the natural oncology, but like that's a rare thing.
Very rare and non-existent probably. And so you guys were having to over time realize the position that you had to hold that you didn't think. You thought that the doctors and the powers that be were holding that. You're like, oh, you guys are they're just one piece of it. And there's a lot of other pieces to it. Yeah. And that it's interesting. I mean, you guys found that out. The hard way is not even the right way to say it, but you found that out throughout the course of Abram's journey. And what you're saying in this moment is like, I would just think about that as early as possible.
Yeah, I've heard the angst in both of you before, but especially even today, like what you would push. I've heard a lot lately in mamas, you said it today, mamas about their kids. Like you got to listen. Like,
there's something to it.
Yes. And I've heard really brilliant, awesome people go, man, if mamas are really doing this about their kids and saying that I've learned to listen because there's something going on. And so
not even different than his birth story. Like there was stuff, but like there is something to, I think the way God wires us that literally it is in us. And yet it's hard. And maybe it's worse because social media, I don't even know, but I think our world, it's like, no, you're crazy. Don't be like, I mean, and not that it can't be that, like, so it's hard, like, but I think there's a balance. And like, there is something in your gut when your gut is screaming at something. Like, I will say, yes, I know childhood cancer is rare, but like at the end of the day, you're not going to regret looking deeper. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, full disclosure, like we've had 2 of our kids have now had full CT scans, like, because I'm like, just literally for constipation issues since Abram passed away, where I'm like, I can't handle this. We're going to go do this. And not that you want, like, I'm not advocating, like, radiation's not good for your body. I won't advocate for that, but I would still stand by the fact that we did that, where I don't know, there can be genetic components and stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to do it because they're having issues all of a sudden. They hadn't before, not dissimilar to Abram. And I'm like, we're going to do it. And I'm thankful. Like, I'm okay that I did that.
And
even
I
though it is a little crazy.
specifically
Like,
heard it with mamas, but I heard you say it today too. Like there was some type of something that was given to you, even when you stepped in and you're like, nope, I know my son. We've done this. Like for both of you.
daddies can fight.
Yeah. And there's something
different than mamas.
there's something that parents need to like be pushed and like encouraged. Like, hey, you do, you know, you're,
And you're not crazy to do that.
yeah.
And I think not all doctors, that's a very general term, but I do think to some degree there is a pressure that like, if you push, if you fight against this, like you're the crazy, like whatever. And I'm like, no, like it's your baby. Like, I don't care how crazy, like it's worth being crazy. That's probably a better way to put it. Like it is worth being crazy. Like in that sense of, I'm going to fight like hell.
For me, I think the orientation of I went in and the doctors were up here, right? And that's where and as the parent, I was below that.
But they're just humans.
Yeah. And
who know a lot more than we do.
And they know a lot and they're great. And I don't want to disparage them as doctors. I would just say as an advocate, I needed to reorient to here. And that's not to bring the doctor down, but I would elevate the advocacy.
The doctor's not his daddy and the doctor's not his mama.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're talking about, is that there's a certain intuition that you possess as a mom and as a dad of a child.
Yeah.
That nobody else does, like period kind of thing. And so because you know him.
Yep.
And you're around him. It just by pure proximity and minutes and hours kind of thing, you're around someone, therefore you know them more kind of thing. And so if you're around him all week and the doctor's around him for a blip, well, you might have something to offer that they don't, as much as they're an expert kind of thing. And what you're saying is like, I had intuitions, I had senses and feelings about my kid, and you followed them in moment. It was a constant battle between that and, I'm just saying, the powers that be. That's a weird way to say it, but that's how I think of it. And so you were doing that kind of thing. And what you're saying to people is like, follow that, like push, ask questions, like that's
okay.
That spark that you have in you about whatever it is kind of thing. Like, don't
I was hesitant.
Suppress that.
I mean, I did. I think like, I don't think you ever did as much as I did, but the way I'm wired a little, like there's definitely like that aspect where there was like, didn't want to step on toes or try to seem like I was the expert. And I think the knowledge that they have is so much more on certain things than I did. And so like, I really needed that. But at the same time, I wish I would have been bolder at stepping up.
And that's what I was just say, just to the parents and caregivers, just don't shortchange yourselves at all, ever.
Yep.
And if you don't think something's right, don't do it.
Or dig deeper, and that can look a lot of different ways.
Yeah, because I mean, they're going home at the end of the 12-hour shift, and it's your kid. Like,
yep.